uh, most of the lights in the world, and Guru Nanak being no exception to the other wisdom teachers, that suffering begins, so from a Sikh tradition, is the cause of suffering is your sense of self. The cause of your suffering is yourself. Suffering is not external, so I'm not saying that pain doesn't exist. Pain is a very physical thing, but suffering is a kind of, the mental.
Is optional.
Is mental, yeah, it's optional. It's a resistance to the way things.
pain.
Yeah, resistance to the way things are.
Yeah.
Resistance to the way things
Yes,
are.
absolutely.
And that resistance can only come from your sense of self, your sense of home, the mind. It can only come from the mind. So the relationship that's provided within the Gurmat perspective paradigm for healing is that in order to heal yourselves, in order to transcend, bring yourself to a space of balance, whatever you want to call, part of the process is to recognize what the mind is and how the mind functions, which is the fundamental output, insight, one of the fundamental insights of your practice of mindfulness. So that you can see the therapeutic process involved in this, which ultimately is not judging or changing positive thoughts into more positive thoughts or negative thoughts into positive thoughts, but it's simply recognizing thought is a thought and it does not necessarily define me. And therefore that release provides you with a possibility of releasing yourself from what you may consider to be your suffering.
I think that it's not different to what we do. I mean, what we ought to be doing in the consulting group. I think it's the recognition of the suchness, of the isness of what is there. And it's a journey towards self-acceptance and acceptance of all the things that have actually happened. Because I think that one of the things that happens is that our memories, our thoughts get attached to certain, how can I put this, emotional
Charge.
Yeah, they get charged emotionally, and in a way that creates a fog, a psycho-emotional fog that it's very difficult to see behind. So in a way it's about breaking conditioning. Breaking conditioning and being able to recognize what's inside, because a lot of the time what's inside is not recognized and it's affecting the inner atmosphere within which you live. It's actually about and this brings us back to what we were talking about before, which is ignorance. The ignorance is the beginning is the foundation of suffering. The more you become aware, the more you can actually accept.
Okay. So if we look at awareness, so ignorance, I absolutely accept. Ignorance is the part of the cause of our fundamental. So what are we ignorant about? One is ignorant about the self, but one is ignorant about the nature of reality.
Absolutely. You don't know how you're here. You don't know who brought you here. You don't know what the purpose of your life is. We're traveling in many ways blind.
Not are we just traveling blind, but we are then educated and conditioned into this perpetually thinking that we can live forever, that life is for somehow going to be free of illness, life is going to be free of age, life is going to be free of suffering. We are educated in this, and we are, in fact, if the basis of therapy is acceptance, then the basis of the current cultural education that we have formally and informally is non-acceptance. Because look at the men outside. How many men do you see who accept themselves to be what they are? Not because they feel that it's different or they're making a conscious choice, but society is providing them with an image of saying, this is what you need to fit into. And it provides the underlying seeds of your dysfunctionality.
Exactly. If I ask you to become a pretzel or a monkey, and you do not fit in to the monkey or the pretzel that I have determined that you should be the box, then in a way there's always going to be a feeling of failure.
Yes. Yes.
If you're not actually what I expect you to be, what society expects you to be, you're always going to feel uncomfortable. So you're always fighting or struggling to become something
acceptable,
different than what you are. And because you're not going to be acceptable to everyone, because there's always going to be people that approve or disapprove of you, whenever there's a sense of disapproval, again, it will generate this feeling of discomfort, this feeling of not being right. When the reality is, and this really leads us to an idea that you and I have talked about before, which is actually the search for our authenticity. Now, for that, to be able to become the authentic self that you really are, and here we probably, we're going to part a big company, you need what I call a strong enough ego that will allow you to withstand the pressures and the projections that you get from the world in order actually to allow yourself to go deeper and deeper and deeper and become more and more the authentic self that you really are. Because authenticity actually comes together with spontaneity.
But I feel there is a need to develop an ego.
Right.
There's a need to develop a healthy ego. That needs to be accepted, your sense of self, let's call it. But it's the recognition of its temporary nature, of its illusionary nature, functional
and its limitations.
Yeah, it's an illusionary nature that enables you to free yourself. So the bondage isn't necessarily to do with what the world thinks of you and how you fit in. The bondage is with the prison of your own sense of self. That's what captures you. That's what holds you in. So you may strengthen that prison, make those iron bars into gold bars, but ultimately you're still caught in the prison of your sense of self, your home, your ego. So from a Goodmuth perspective, once you begin to recognize the ego, once you recognize that the mind, what it is, it's immaterial. Whether it has a belief system that is strong, or it believes in this or believes in that, it opens up the experience of life as it's unfolding, which is far bigger, embraces you, holds you in it, but far, far bigger than your conceptual size of your conceptual sense of self.
I agree, and I disagree with you. Let me tell you what. I disagree with your description of the ego, and let me tell you why. I think you made it too rigid. You made it into a cage. So it can be a golden cage. What I want for a healthy ego is that it becomes porous, that it becomes transparent, that it can actually transform itself and actually be absorbed in. But in order for it to be absorbed in the greater self that one is, you always need to be able to have that core. Without that core, you can't function.
But that creates your duality. Does it not create your duality? How can you have this sense of wholeness if there's a sense of me that separates me? Of course, it's a functional, healthy, whatever, authentic me, but it separates me from that which is. So this is my definition. So if we break down the definition of ego, it's simple. It's my sense of separateness from that which is.
And your sense of connection as well. That you do have such a thing as a skin. You do have such a thing as an individuated you. You're a cell in the universe. You might be also a drop in the sea. Now, my consciousness is not developed enough, actually, to be the sea completely. I am aware of the sea. I am aware that I'm trying to recognize the unity. It's a journey towards that. But by virtue of my being born as a human being, by virtue of my conditioning, and by virtue, I grant you this, of my limitations, of how far I can go in my mind, in my capacity, I can actually go part of the way. But I need, and I still hold, a sense of separateness between me and you. And I suspect, with all due respect, Dav, that you also have a sense of separation of you and me.
Sure.
And if we don't, actually, we will get lost in a world of confusion and
sense of separateness, I think. Okay, so let's look at the another way of defining ourselves. So you said you are a cell within this universal existence. But if
it's only a metaphor, eh?
Yeah, of course. No. I'm just trying to put another metaphor, metaphor, but another explanation. If we were to consider existence, whether it's this plant, whether it's you, whatever it is, we find that it consists of nothing more than 5 elements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? So it's got the solid bit in it, it's got the fire bit in it, it's got the water bit in it, air bit in it, and the space bit in it. That's the same that I occupy, same that you occupy, same that every other individual. In fact, nothing exists in existence that isn't part of these 5.
Agreed.
Yeah? So this sense of self-separateness begins to dissolve because of the wisdom of the nature of reality as it is transmitted and as it is shared. So
now hang on, yeah, that's brilliant, but my concern has to do with the digestive process.
Sure.
Now, what you're saying is absolutely right. I can accept it here.
Sure.
Now, how much of that actually, in the same way that a good interpretation can go through and get into another human being, but it has to go down. It has to go down all the way. Now, a lot of the time what I find with people is that they have problems in the digestive tract. I'm talking now psychologically as well. That things go down, up, or can remain here, or they can go down here, but they don't go down all the way. So we need to be able to integrate these ideas and live these ideas, which is what I call realization, to make them real in our day-to-day living, in our interaction with the world, in our interaction with each other. And there is where we need to remember to remember.
Sure. And if we were to just look at this, if we were to take a snapshot of current social, just the way where the world is, you'll find that it is this very sense of division that has created what it's creating. It's perpetuating suffering, not just for itself, but for everything else. So within this merger of psychotherapy and right or royal path of mindfulness, there is a need for that other element of education, of bringing some of these perennial philosophies together in a way that people can make sense of their mindfulness experience. Because ultimately, with awareness, it's not about allowing something to be intellectually digested and then accepted, but to put your hand in the fire and to know what fire feels like. It has to be experiential. So when we see, for example, within the process of our practice, we see the temporary nature of our breath. We see that the only thing that keeps us, the breath is breathing by itself, the heart is beating by itself, the whole existence, working from us inside out, is working clockwork by itself. Doesn't need us. There's no need for us. There's a possibility of being able to let go. And that also means letting go of the sense of self.
Right. That's a mouthful. Now, I'm afraid there is something that worries me about this, which is falling into idealism. And I think one of the things that, when I look around the world, I see a lot of chaos, a lot of pain, a lot of confusion, and I also see a lot of people working very hard, developing or trying to develop ways of actually helping humanity.
Sure.
I think that meditation, mindfulness, retreats, therapy, religions at their best are all ways of actually making their own contribution to bring healing to the planet. And I think that there's a lot of ignorance, there's a lot of pain, and what you're saying is right, but I think that that's at such a high level that it's you're going to lose sight, and that's what I don't want, of the masses of humanity.
Sure.
And I think that is something that we need to look at. So it's not, is mindfulness better than therapy? Is becoming a Buddhist monk better than mindfulness? Is actually being an Orthodox Christian better than being a Muslim? Is a Sunni better than a Shia? All these divisions actually are created by mankind.
Mental. They're mental disease. Religion is a mental disease, and it divides us. And that's all it's. If
But
we
also
look
not
at
only
current
religion, I think that
no,
in
but
the world,
politics. It's the game is the same. The
Pope says that we are now worshipping money, and I think that's right, and materiality.
and celebrities.
Yes.
Our gods are celebrities today. So look, we're not. It's not about idealism. I don't think it's about idealism, but I think it's about we have a finite life.
Yeah. And we have to do the best that we can.
And if the world is drowning, I can't do much about it. But what I can do is something about me.
Exactly.
And this is really where it starts and it ends, which is let the world take care of itself as long as we take care of ourselves. And the question then arises, what will be my measure of success? Because in this finite life, is it going to be the plastic that I've collected? Is it going to be my bank account? Is it the people that I've been around? Or is it what I have discovered about myself as a human being? And I think that to me is the fundamental angst of a human, is not knowing about themselves.
You know what? I agree. And it's what we said before. When the Buddha said that the foundation that life was suffering, and that the foundation of suffering was ignorance. Or when Freud said that the whole purpose of healing
Don't get me on Freud.
was to make conscious the unconscious, which is, whatever one thinks of Freud, I mean, or psychoanalysis or whatever, the reality is that it all points to the same direction.
It does and it doesn't. It does and it doesn't. And I'll tell you why. Because, all right, very interesting point. This part of the healing point is making the unconscious conscious. Part of the healing process, yes? Is knowing what's... But there may be another way of looking at the same, another model, which is saying, all right, that there is a conscious self now that knows what's happening here. Mm-hmm. And then there is the unconscious self, which is the accumulated experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So are we looking at uncovering this little bit? Because this...
No. I mean, if you, at its broadest, the unconscious is the universe. The unconscious is everything that is. The unconscious is the sea. It's not just your little history. It's not just your individualized history. It's a history of mankind. It's a history of the universe.
So it's broader.
It's much broader.
But the one that influences you, the one that influences you in your day-to-day functionality, is your historical unconscious.
The one, hang on a minute, there is no such thing. It's part of that. But what influences you is actually the totality of the unconscious. You start by that, but you don't finish there.
No,
if not, we wouldn't be having this dialogue.
Sure, but is it not that is the that's what influences our behavior. That's what influences, because we have been conditioned, for argument's sake.
You like arguments, don't you?
No, I don't like arguments. I like exploring.
Polemicist.
No.
You like a good polemic.
No, I like exploring topics with people who are intellectually capable of exploring such
You've
topics.
got the wrong person. I'm not intellectually capable of anything.
That's why I have you here, my friend.
That's why I'm only trying to build a little bridge here with a polemicist. It's very difficult. You make my job very difficult.
No, I'm trying to put some meaning to this. I'm trying to put some meaning to it. So there could be a model that can present itself and saying, from the moment you're born, you start with this like blank sheet of paper. This blank sheet of paper, through your accumulated knowledge and information and conditioning, part of it's always being pushed in the back, which you don't need to remember, which becomes your unconscious self, right? It's a model that's being presented, which then influences your current interaction with the world.
Partly.
So the healing process is sorting this little bit out. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
Okay, then tell me what's the right model then.
I'm telling you, I mean, it's a caricature. This idea that there's a blank sheet, I mean, what we're talking about here is, first of all, there's a philosophical...
No, but the blank sheet, are you born with a mind?
Hang on a minute. Nature, nurture.
No, I'm asking you, forget about the theory. Are you born with a mind?
The mind forms itself.
So you're not born with one?
No.
So we're conditioned into one?
We need a mind. A mind is an instrument.
Yeah, but whatever it may be, the question is, are we born with one or not? Because if we're born, I'm born with a hand, but am I born with a mind?
You're not very intelligent. Wait a minute. Now, this is an exercise in intelligence.
Okay.
Because we're talking about two different worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, two different worlds operate with two different sets of laws.
Sure.
Now,
sure.
on the physical level, yes. On a psychological level,
Mm-hmm.
everything has to develop from a total undifferentiated mass of nothing into whatever psychic apparatus through connections that are starting to be formed at a neurological level in the brain.
Okay.
Right? So when you say, oh, we're not born with a mind, no, I mean, we learn. The mind is a learned thing.
Sure, and here lies the essence of therapy, I guess, is to know what the mind is. And therefore, yes, I agree, we come from two different paradigms, but they have a way of explaining the nature of a human being which makes sense in the 21st century. It may have been, 2,500 years or 500 years ago, whenever it was, but it makes sense. So asking this question, knowing, was I born with a mind? Do I see a mind born? And you discover, no, it's something that's conditioned, that's created in you. You have the capacity, the building blocks. And that conditioning creates a healthier you or unhealthier you. And the nature of psychotherapeutic work, from my understanding, is to fix that little bit.
The nature of psychotherapy is a modest one. It does not lead to enlightenment.
But we absolutely know that.
But the nature...
How many enlightened psychotherapists do you see?
No, hang on a minute. But what it does do is lead to a gradual disendarkment.
Sure.
Now, gradual disendarkment is not enlightenment, but it is really bringing a bit more light. The rest of the journey is up to the individual, to the human being that will actually continue, hopefully, on the path. Some people will continue to fall in. How many enlightened people do I know as psychotherapists or out of therapy? I don't know any. I mean, I know people that are more or less disendarkened.
Sure.
That's my experience.
Sure. Okay.